Welcome to SCBWI Carolina's Book Fairies First Look. I'm your host, Mickey Bear. Joining me today is award-winning author and editor Amanda Cleary Eastep. Amanda is a CELA award-winning children's author and a book editor. The sixth book in her Tree Street Kids middle grade series for readers 8 to 12 released in August 2025. These books about a group of ordinary friends having not so ordinary adventures take readers and their parents back to the 1990s. That's like ancient history. She also enjoys writing young adult fiction for Brio Teen magazine. The joy of being outdoors and the stewardship of nature are central to her stories. To nurture her own curiosity and love of creation, Amanda is currently studying the ecosystem of Southern Appalachia. Amanda writes and edits in a cabin in the mountains of Western North Carolina, but she lived most of her life in the suburbs of Chicago, the home of the Tree Street Kids. Amanda and her husband together have 8 grown children, lots of grandchildren, and a border collie named Annie, who wakes Amanda up early every morning to write. Welcome, Amanda.
Thanks, Mickey. Yeah, she wakes me up early for other things too, but it sounds better just to talk about the writing. And I have to say it's really refreshing to talk to someone who knows how to pronounce Appalachia.
Oh, well, yeah, if you've been in North Carolina for long enough, they make sure you say it correctly.
Yeah.
Well, listen, before we get started with the interview, let me tell our viewers about your latest release, Jack and the Red Giant.
This is it right here.
So, Jack Finch is seeing stars, and it has nothing to do with Christmas. Snowball wars are being waged against the Tree Street Kids, and Jack has taken a hit to the eye from one of Buzz Rublatz's polar projectiles. Jack plans the perfect defense, the abominable Snowminator. But building your greatest invention is tough when you're also practicing for the starring role in the school nativity play. One cold, starry night, a neighborhood catastrophe disturbs the peacefulness of the snow-covered streets and twinkling lights. What's that terrible orange glow down the block? And does Buzz know more about it than he's telling? Jack is determined to find out. But first, he needs a Christmas miracle. Will Jack find room in his heart to welcome an unexpected addition to the stage and his home? Well, I have to tell you, with all of this hot, humid North Carolina weather, I love that Jack and the Red Giant whisks us away to cooler climates. And I grew up in New Jersey and experienced similar snowball conflicts as a kid. So this was super fun for me.
Yeah,
So,
well, I grew up in the Chicago area, so lots of snow there.
yep, yep.
It's quite different from Western North Carolina where we're at right now, but
Yeah. So, listen, a question I ask a lot is what do you hope kids will take away from your stories? So, I'm going to pose that to you, but also, can you explain why this question is important for writers to consider?
yeah, I think there's different takeaways, I think, from any book in particular. So I've written 6 books in this series so far, and each one has a theme that at least drives me as the author. It's not necessarily like I'm trying to get this message across to my reader. I hope that they take away certain ideas or certain lessons, from the storytelling. So, for instance, in Jack, it's really about all of the books are about friendship. And this book in particular is really focused on what does it really mean to, we hear that phrase, if you're a person that's been in church, or even if you're not, you've heard that phrase, loving your enemies. So it was something that Jesus told people to do, which was really radical to hear and still is today. So it kind of takes a look at that. What does that look like? And what kind of uncomfortable place could that put even a child in and just kind of their normal everyday life? So I like when a child can kind of start to think about what would I do in this situation. So the takeaways could be varied depending on the book, but they're also overall, I really want kids to feel safe in the books. I want them to feel like they're welcomed into the stories that this group of friends, that these Tree Street kids would say, yeah, why don't you come on into our fort and hang out for a while? And I want them to laugh. I love incorporating humor into the books. I want them to learn a little something, even if it's they don't know they're learning. I have a lot of fun facts in the book, science, and you mentioned my love of nature, so there's a lot of science facts, literature, history. So I like to tuck those in as little sticky notes. There's just a lot of things going on, but I think especially for them to take away feeling like they experience something along with the characters and they feel good about it at the end and they feel hopeful.
And as an editor, this is
Mm.
important for writers to consider. So explain that to us as well. Like, why are you looking for that in the writing, and why should writers consider, what people are getting from it?
Yeah, there's that bigger why, and I've been asked that by people before. I think that's a really good thing for us to consider as writers. Why am I doing this? Why especially am I writing for children? Because that is such a responsibility. What we tell them, what we teach them, either overtly or not overtly, is important. I feel like we're gonna be held responsible for that in some way, but I think it just puts our focus back on who we're writing for. We a lot of times have, like I said, we have messages that maybe we want to share, but we really it kind of helps us to focus again on our audience, who are our children, and why are we writing for them in the first place, and why are we writing this story in particular for this ideal audience member, this child that we have in mind. So I think that's just a really important way for writers to they need to think about that, and it helps them focus just their purpose in writing, but also, like you asked me as an editor, why am I writing this story? Helps me to focus my writing of the story.
Okay, so nature and the care of it feature heavily in your books and short stories. Can you give a brief example of why this is an important theme?
Well, one thing is we're surrounded by nature, and you'll hear lots of conversations about kids are on screens too much, we're not playing outside. I have a lot of my audience are homeschool families, so that's a big part of my audience. They're very focused on their kids being outside, getting hands-on kinds of learning. And I raised my kids that way. And of course, in the 90s, where these stories are set, just happens to be the era when I raised my children. So I'm very familiar with kids not having that easy access. They weren't carrying around phones. They had walkie-talkies, or they were on their bikes. They weren't necessarily, sitting in front of a computer or holding a phone and having that computer right in front of them and having access to the broader world. So this idea of kids learning and being inspired and getting outside and moving. And I think that's just, to me, that's really a mission of mine, is to prompt kids to get outside, to help them to, I think even especially as adults, and we do this naturally, we lose our sense of awe of the world around us. And you don't have, now I live in a beautiful holler in the mountains of Western North Carolina, but I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and I worked in the city. And I remember that was for this nature girl, that was a little bit painful to my soul. But I knew that, and as an adult, I knew to look for things. I was looking for beauty in different places, even as I was getting off of the metro and onto the L. Is there beauty in this person's face? Is there beauty in, a flower going out the crack in the sidewalk, whatever it is? So that idea of observing and appreciating, and I think a lot of that really happens when we're outside, when we're stopping to look at something small. If it's an ant crossing the sidewalk and dragging something along, or if it's a bird, or we have this playground, Mickey, this is gigantic playground, and we're also called to steward that. And we know that there's lots of discussions about what's happening to the earth. Are we caring for it the way we need to? And I think for kids to be outside and in their yards and in their spaces, whether they live in the city, whether they live in the country or the mountains, this is your space. How do you steward this small space? Well, how do you appreciate it? How do you find joy in it? And so I think nature, the observing of it, the learning about it really helps with that.
So in this book, in particular, Jack is in a play the Nativity for Christmas. So, what do you tell writers who ask you how they can best include their personal faith traditions or beliefs in their fiction?
Yeah, that's always a really big question. And I think, this my fiction would be considered Christian fiction, which irks me a little bit, but that's okay. It's these characters, a couple of them are in Christian families. And I think it's really whether you're Jewish or Muslim or whatever faith you are, to integrate, and I'm not even crazy about that term, but to make it a natural part, to make your faith a natural part of your stories, if that is what you want to do. If first, it needs to be authentic to your character. So, how does my character Jack, he's 10 years old, I remember my 10-year-old son, how is he being raised in a Christian home? How is he processing that? And how is he applying it in his little 10-year-old everyday life? What's he thinking about? Is it changing his behavior? What does it mean to him? So the first thing I did was I remembered my son when he was about 10 years old and he had to memorize a verse from the Bible for school, and he chose Jesus wept. Because of course it's like that's the easiest verse, right? So I'm like, that's so authentic to a 10-year-old boy, right? So that made it into the story because I'm like, that's so Jack. That was my son, that was my character. And we have to be careful with anything we want to share, from whether it's our personal beliefs or our stances. Are we just trying to use our stories as almost like a funnel to the audience, or does it mean something to the story? So our faith needs to be authentic to the character and it needs to be part of the story. We should never sacrifice the quality of the story for getting a message across. Sometimes, a story could sound too didactic or too preachy. And especially with Christian fiction, you hear that a lot. A lot of people don't want to read Christian fiction because, well, they're preaching to me. Well, you can't always help everyone's perceptions, but there is some of that intent in authors too, to teach something, to get a point across, to communicate a specific stance. You hear the term agenda a lot as we talk about children's books. So I think just any author needs to check themselves and be careful that the story's coming first, that their reader's coming first, and we can't help but tell things through a certain lens because that's who we are.
Right.
And so there's that part. But if we are going to be more overt about sharing certain things in our stories, is it authentic to that story?
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point because the authenticity then makes it more of a reflection about what's happening culturally in the world. And that really is what writing does. It reflects the world that we live in. And if it's an authentic take and you are reflecting experiences that you had, like you were talking about with your son, people then can easily relate because it's similar to what they're going through or how their children may react or how their friends may react. So I think that's a really good take on integrating your faith in what you
I
write.
think it feels more welcoming too.
Right.
Even if you don't hold that particular set of beliefs, you can learn about it. You can learn about somebody's life, or you can learn about somebody else's faith because you feel welcomed into it.
Right.
So,
Oh, I love that. You've been writing professionally and for the love of it for most of your life. What was the turning point for you before the publication of the Tree Street Kids series?
well, I at this point was in my early 50s at my turning point. We all have different turning points, right? But I was on the train to the city to my new job as I'm the senior developmental editor at Moody Publishers. It's a Christian publisher in Chicago. They've been around for over 125 years. And I thought, okay, you've got lots of train time. And I'm not writing as a profession, I'll be editing, which is different. It's a different skill set. You're using a different, really kind of a different part of your brain. And I find editing to me to be easier than writing. Writing feels more emotionally and mentally exhausting to me, even though I find probably more joy in it than I do in editing. I remember sitting on the train the one day on the way to work to the publishing house, and I almost said out loud, which would be fine to do on a train to Chicago because all kinds of crazy things are happening. But I said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" You know? And I thought, I want to go back to my children's writing. I had been writing professionally for decades and all different for newspapers, for corporations, for nonprofits. I had published my first children's story years ago when my kids were little for Ladybug magazine. And I was writing Sunday school curriculum and kind of dabbling and, writing when I could, but not putting the value on it that I wish I would have. I think we do that a lot as writers. We're just like, well, I'm not making money. Well, I haven't been published. Whatever the lie is that we tell ourselves. And so we don't put the time in. And so I really had to call myself on the carpet and say, okay, you're in your early 50s. How do you want to spend the rest of your life? And it was like, I want to recommit to writing for kids because it's what I love. It's what I feel called to. And so that was that moment where how are you going to use your train time?
Another question I like to ask is what's next? So, Amanda, what's your next project? And what is your favorite thing about your current work in progress?
So the project I'm working on right now, you mentioned in my bio that I have written for Brio Teen Magazine. It is a Christian magazine focused mostly on teen girls. So I am working on my third story for them. It would be considered young adult. And I, again, I love the opportunity to go from the middle grade, which these books are middle grade, so squarely 8 to 12-year olds into that 13 to 17. So my protagonist is 15 years old, and the real joy I'm getting from this is that I'm writing a story inspired by our experience of the Western North Carolina floods. It'll be a year in September, will be the first anniversary of those floods. And I've talked to so many kids at different schools and through different book events we've done. I became a volunteer with a grassroots organization called the 21st Century Pack Horse Librarians after the flood. So, if you're not familiar with the Pack Horse Librarians, they were a group of women that were part of Roosevelt's plan to get people jobs during the Depression. And these women rode mules and horses up into the remote areas of eastern Kentucky to deliver books to children and families and to, in many cases, read to them because they didn't know how. So, this 21st Century Pack Horse librarian, our founder is Kirsten Crawford Turner, and they are now a nonprofit. But we have, through different events in especially the hardest hit areas of Western North Carolina, there's also a group in Western Virginia. We've delivered well over 15,000 books for free to kids. We've had just so many books donated. My publisher donated 500 books, 250 of mine, and it was, you're always thinking about, oh, it'd be great to sell my books, but I can tell you that giving them away after a tragedy is a beautiful thing. So this story is inspired by all those events, and I'm trying to encapsulate that in 1,500
Course,
words.
we want to stay in touch. What is the best way for readers, educators, librarians, families to stay up to date with your publications, your events, everything that you're doing?
Two easy ways is just to type in Amanda Cleary Eastep. I don't know if that's really easy or not. AmandaClearyEastep.com. That's just kind of my personal website and blog. TreeStreetKids.com has all the information about my books, and you'll find my social media on both of those. I'm very active on Instagram at book_leaves. I don't know why I did that, but I did. I just really like the combination of nature and books and writing, so that's probably where I'm most active.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Amanda, and
Thank you.
congratulations. Oh, of course. Congratulations again on your latest Tree Street Kids release, Jack and the Red Giant.
Thanks so much, Mickey.